So keep your chumashim close today. I'm going to see if we can do a little bit of learning together as I talk. A couple of days ago, I opened the weather app on my phone, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that the forecast for this weekend was mostly sunny and 82 degrees. Until I looked more closely and noticed the location was set for Antigua and Barbuda, which is where I was last week. I want to speak today about the subtle relationship between numbering and naming. And to complicate matters a bit, I want to begin with something that Miriam and I and the kids learned in Antigua last week. We decided for one of the excursions from our cruise, we took a cruise with Bubby, which was mostly great. It was great to be with my mother. It was great to be with my kids. I didn't leave either of my kids, that is, on any of the islands in the Caribbean, so I consider that a victory. I also didn't gain weight. I didn't lose weight, but so managed to combine an absurd amount of eating with some exercise classes. But one of the excursions that we took was led by a woman named Veli, and this was on Antigua, and it's one of these organizations called Tours by Locals. Anyone ever done one of these where you can kind of go, and instead of just going with the cruise, you can actually go from someone from one of the islands who will then take you around and show you her particular country. And it was very interesting to go around with her because she showed us some of the arts and crafts scenes, but she also talked about the politics and the history of the islands. And for those of us who were paying attention to the hurricanes this past season, Barbuda in particular was really decimated by this. And if you remember, there was an article in several papers that said the entire population of Barbuda had been relocated to Antigua because it was such a dire situation. And it's true, there was great devastation on the island, but when you talk to the locals, there's a little bit more to the story. And Veli was explaining to us that the prime minister of these two islands used this as an opportunistic land grab. So by relocating the Barbudan population, he was able potentially to have a number of developers come in and redevelop the island of Barbuda. And in fact, the population, many of those have now returned to Barbuda, and there are these significant mass protests. And she was saying, it's Robert De Niro who has all of these investments. So in the spirit of our session today, allegedly, I have no evidence, this is just reporting one source, but it's interesting when you get to a place and you hear the perspectives of a local population. Politics everywhere are complicated, and the question of who counts is frequently related to the question of who is in power. And also, perhaps not surprisingly, who is named and who is simply a number. So I want to look with you at the beginning of this week's Parsha, which can be found in your chumashim on page 317. And you'll notice here that the Parsha begins with the words, Ve'ela Shemot b'nei Yisrael. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each coming with his household. And then it goes on and tells us in verse 5, Vayhi kol nefesh yotzei yerach Yaakov shiv'im nefesh. The total that descended from Jacob, who came along, was 70. But of course, we didn't name 70 names. We named 11 names plus Joseph here, but it's meant to be symbolic. The number 70 is inclusive here of not only the 11 sons of Yaakov, excluding Joseph, who's already there, but it's all those who descended from those 11, and also perhaps definitely including Dinah. But you might wonder, why then name 70 if we're only going to, why say the number 70 if we're only going to name a few names and not 70 names? Isn't that a little strange? And in fact, earlier on in the Torah, we did name all of the names. And where did that happen? Well, it happened a couple of Parshiot ago in Parashat Vayigash. So if you turn there, you can keep a thumb in Exodus, but if you turn to page 281, I'll give you a second to get there. We have in chapter 46 of Breshit very similar language to what we just read. Ve'ela Shemot b'nei Yisrael. This is verse 8 at the top of the page. Haba'im Mitzrayma Yaakov uvanav. These are the names of the Israelites, the children of Israel, Haba'im Mitzrayma, that came toward Egypt, the sons of Jacob. But as opposed to our Parsha in Shemot, here we actually get a listing of all the specific names in the tally. And if you look ahead at verse 27, you'll see that the tally is the same. And Joseph's sons who were born to him in Egypt were to a number. Thus, the total of Jacob's household who came to Egypt was 70 persons. So we have the 70 in Exodus, and we have the 70 in the book of Genesis. But if you look at the actual names, it seems that they're all there. Probably there are others that are assumed to be there. We only have 2 women who are mentioned. One of them is Dinah, the sister of the 12 brothers, and the other is Serach bat Asher, the daughter of Asher, who's named, and there's a whole interesting tradition. But if you look between verses 9 and verse 25, each of the 4 mothers, Leah, Rachel, Zilpah, Bilhah, have their descendants listed. And then if you get to verse 26, you'll find the following. The tally of all of those, all belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt, his own issue. Aside from the wives of Jacob's sons, all these persons numbered 66. So in Exodus, we had 70, and in the next verse, we're going to have 70, but here it says 66. So what gives? This is a little strange. So Rashi explains. Who was Rashi? 11th century French winemaker who in his spare time did commentary on the Torah. That's why, by the way, there's a brand of wine, a label, Rashi wine. If you ever see Rashi wine, because he was a vintner, that's hence Rashi, right? Impressive guy. So Rashi says that you have to read the word here, haba'ah, in our section, that is in the book of Exodus. You have to read it differently in these 2 different ways. Okay? The first one means we're coming. The children of Israel were coming, were on their way to Egypt. But once they get there, haba'ah doesn't mean we're coming. That means they had come, they had arrived. And so on their way to Egypt, there were 66. But once they get to Egypt, if you add to 66, the ones that were already there, you have Yosef who was there, you have Ephraim who was there, and Manasseh who was there, the sons of Joseph. That gets you to a total of, 69, not 70. So wait a second. If the number says 70, and we had 66, plus the 3 who are there, how do we get to 70? And Rashi says the 70th person is Yocheved. Who is Yocheved? Moses' mother. So now why would we include Moses' mother in the tally? We don't have any record of the birth of Moshe's mother. And if Moshe's mother, why not Moshe's father, who also was somewhat responsible for bringing Moshe into the world? Why Yocheved and not Amram? And I want to suggest to you that the inclusion of Yocheved is actually consistent with the text, because the verses here in Genesis, in Parashat Vayigash, gave us this genealogy from the 4 different mothers. So it makes sense that if you're going to include the genealogy in the future, you would also use the mother of the next generation. This list is a way of tying the generation of Moshe Rabbeinu to the previous generations of those who came to Egypt. And in that sense, it's consistent. It's also important as we think about the trajectory of our people, because their coming to Egypt was only half of the story. There is also the going out of Egypt, hence the name for the book of Shemot in English, Exodus. But you must be asking, why all the mental gymnastics in the first place? Why not just stick with the number 66? After all, that seems to be an accurate count of the actual names that were included. And the Torah even goes out of its way to tell us there were a couple that died and didn't come. And so what's all of this sort of craziness of having to get from 66 to 70? And for this, I want to actually look at the commentary in Eitz Chaim with you. So look on, I'm trying to find it here, look on page 282 at the bottom. You see where it says verse 27? Okay? Everyone with me? 70 persons. The number 70 here, as elsewhere in biblical literature, is symbolic, expressing totality. The number 70 is the base of 10, multiplied by 70, a number expressing completeness. It reiterates the point made in verses 1 and 6 through 7, emphasizing the comprehensive nature of the descent to Egypt, because this event is seen as the fulfillment of Genesis 15. Note, and here's where it gets really interesting, note the Greek Septuagint, as well as the Exodus Qumran text, has a tradition of 75, which is not a stock number. So there are other traditions of counting that don't get you to 70, but for whatever reason, the Torah wants us to get to 70, this being 7 times 10, 10 being a special number because, right, very important not just in our culture, but in most cultures of the world. 10 often is an important number for obvious reasons. So here we have the number 70, and then the Torah wants to sort of get us from 66 to 70, and so the rabbis have to do these mental gymnastics to get us there. It's comprehensive, but it's a positive number. It's a number expressing wholeness. And one narrative's wholeness is another's dangerous population explosion. One person's view of migrant populations as human resources to be tapped, as did the Pharaoh in Joseph's time, is radically different from another Pharaoh who looks at a burgeoning foreign population as a threat. It really depends on the perspective of the one doing the counting. One way that we see this differing perspective made manifest is in the relationship between numbers and names. In the Torah, it seems, and I would argue, there's an inverse relationship between the two. As one increases, the other is diminished. Whereas in Genesis, in Parashat Vayigash, 70 people are named, having only to extrapolate a little to get from 66 to 70. In our Parsha, in Shemot, while the number 70 is used, only 11 names plus Joseph are actually stated. So in just a couple of Torah portions, we've now moved from the assertion of a number of specific names, or the articulation of a number of specific names, to a general rounding off, and we have to extrapolate to get to 70. And then we get to verse 8 of chapter 1 of Exodus. So turn there, page 318. Vayakom melech chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yada et Yosef. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Here we have a new king, a new Pharaoh, who doesn't even know Joseph's name, let alone his father or his father's descendants. What he does know, it seems, are the numbers, and the numbers scare him. Look at verse 9, at verse 10. And he said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground." It's a despot's solution to an anticipated problem. The solution of one who can separate out numbers of people from their humanity, from their individual identities. Have the numbers actually increased? Is Pharaoh's perception in any way in line with reality? Well, the pshat of the Torah, the plain meaning of the text, doesn't really say. The Midrash does imply that there was a population explosion among the Hebrews that builds even on the stated text in the Torah that says that they increased. So look at the wording of verse 7. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly, so that the land was filled with them. And if you look at the Hebrew, Uvnei Yisrael paru v'yishvatzu v'yirbu v'yamtzu bim'od me'od v'timalei ha'aretz otam. So Rashi points out that not only does it describe that they were fruitful and they multiplied, but that there are actually 6 words in here, 4 verbs and 2 emphatic me'ods. And Rashi says, based on the Midrash, that this means that each Hebrew mother had 6 children at a time. They were having litters of kids. So what is going on here? Is Rashi teaching about the extraordinary anatomy and fertility of Hebrew women? Is he really making that claim? Part of it's probably about reconciling the hundreds of thousands of Hebrews who leave Egypt, at least in one counting, just over 200 years later. But I think what Rashi is really doing is trying to articulate the perspective of one who sees a foreign population first and foremost as a disease or as an infestation. It's no accident that what prompts Rashi's comment and his take on why Pharaoh responds so invidiously to the Hebrews is the Torah's use of the term v'yishvatzu. And that's actually Rashi's dibora matril. That's the word that he uses to introduce his commentary about how the Hebrew women were each having 6 babies at a time. V'yishvatzu comes from the word sheretz. What's a sheretz? It's like a creepy crawly thing. It's a bug, snakes, vermin, to be contained or maybe even eradicated, not embraced, surely not partnered with and elevated to the highest levels of government, as Joseph was in his time. The Exodus is an immigration story gone back. A situation where a group of foreigners seeking refuge and safe harbor, nourishment, and security are welcomed at first and then rejected in the most profound way. It's a story of the advent of chattel slavery that very, very quickly devolves into even attempted genocide, the mass murder of the male babies of the Hebrews. It's a story that we know all too well. We tell it each year on Pesach. But here in our Parsha, the Torah seems to be teaching us another lesson as well. That there is a subtle but essential relationship between naming and numbering. And when we number at the expense of naming, when human beings are afforded simply an accounting instead of counting as individuals in all their humanity, the consequences can be serious indeed. Shabbat Shalom.